We are on chapter 7. This is where we're actually going to put in everything we've learned into practice. So you're going to be learning about the different types of rhythms, and that's going to be the only new learning you're going to do is memorizing these rhythms and the different rules that comes along with them. But from here on out, you are going to use everything that you've learned from chapters 1 through 6 to interpret a rhythm. So this is the whole point. This is putting it all together. So chapter 7, we're going to discuss the rhythms originating in the sinus node. So if you remember back to chapter 2, when we learned about the conduction system, where is your sinus node located? Which is in the top right atrium of the heart. And you learned about the right atrium in chapter 1. So we are going to be looking at rhythms that are only going to come from the sinus node in the right atrium. This sinus rhythm is also known as the original pacemaker of the heart. Our rhythm needs to be between 60 and 100 beats to be considered normal. So if I have an impulse that comes from my sinus node, then my rhythm should be within the normal limits. But if I have an impulse that comes from another node, not the sinus node, such as your AV or your ventricles, then my impulse, my heart rate, my beats per minute is not going to be 60 to 100, and it's going to be less. If it's the AV node, it's going to be 40 to 60 beats per minute. And if that impulse is coming from the ventricles, it's only going to be 20 to 40 beats per minute, and it doesn't reach the atrium. So again, this is all the way going back to chapter 1 and 2 and adding to it what we learned from chapters 3 through 6. So your sinus rhythms, again, originate in the sinus node. They travel through the atria or your atrium. That's the chambers of the heart, the top two chambers of the heart. And they are going to depolarize them. Remember, what is depolarized? That's where we're going to get that spark, that impulse. That's where my sodium and potassium are going to cross, and we're going to get a positive charge. We're going to get a contraction as the mechanical response, and calcium is going to be released to get that. It's going to head down the normal conduction pathways, and then it's going to depolarize the ventricles. So wherever that impulse is and what tissue it is touching of the heart is who it's going to depolarize. And as it travels down the heart, the tissue that is not being touched by that impulse is then going to repolarize and relax. The word on sinus rhythms is the sinus node is the pacemaker in control unless by illness or death of the sinus node a lower pacemaker takes over at its slower inherent rate. This is known as an escape. A lower pacemaker becomes irritable and takes over at a faster rate, and this is called usurpation and irritability. So if my sinus, my original pacemaker of the heart, is not working correctly to give me that normal heartbeat of 60 to 100 beats per minute, then a lower pacemaker is going to take over, but it's going to be at a slower rate. If that lower pacemaker takes over by illness or death, it is known as the escape beat. And if that lower pacemaker becomes irritable, we're going to get a faster rate, which is going to be your usurpation or irritability. So the inherent rate, the normal rate, the original pacemaker rate of the sinus node is 60 to 100. And we're talking beats per minute. The rate can move higher or lower if the sinus node is acted on by the sympathetic or the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rates that are too fast or too slow can cause symptoms to decrease cardiac output. So underline, notate this, pause the video, write it down. If my heart rate is too fast, or if it is too slow, it can cause my heart to have decreased cardiac output. When it comes to taking that national certification, they're going to ask you questions like, what effect does this rhythm have on the heart? If you do not know the answer, always choose the answer that says decreased cardiac output. And you're going to hear me say it over and over and over. So if you don't know anything for that certification, at least you're going to know what happens to the heart if it is not beat at its inherent rate of the sinus node, which is decreased cardiac output. And what does decreased cardiac output mean? We'll go back all the way back to chapter 1 when we talked about the heart and what the job of the heart is. The job of the heart is to pump blood, to circulate your blood throughout the body, to deliver oxygen to your organs, to come back to your heart and go to your lungs, to get that oxygen and circulate it back around. So if I have decreased cardiac output, this means that my blood is not being pushed out accurately in my circulatory system, which can cause my blood pressure to be off, which can cause some of my tissues not to get the oxygen that they need. So it is very important that we catch these problems with the heart to prevent any symptoms such as decreased cardiac output. So sinus rhythms are standard against which all other rhythms are compared. So this is the very first rhythm that you're going to learn, which is what we're going to compare all the other rhythms to. So if you see sinus rhythm, you should automatically put in your head that this is going to be my normal rhythm. And you're going to memorize those rules for a sinus rhythm. And any rhythms that do not match the rules of the sinus rhythm is going to tell me there's something wrong with this patient. There's something going on with their heart. We're going to compare all the rhythms that we take to this normal sinus rhythm. So what is the criteria for sinus rhythms? Sinus rhythms need to have upright matching P waves and lead 2, followed by a Q or rest. Now remember, when we talked about your P waves, they also need to be married. So when we say followed by a Q or rest, it could also be worded differently in saying married to the Q or rest. I don't know why. Okay. Your PR intervals need to be constant, meaning they need to be the same. Your heart rate is going to be less than or equal to 160 at rest. Okay? So wait a minute. A normal heart rate should be between 60 and 100 beats per minute. But here for a sinus rhythm, it's telling me my heart rate needs to be less than or equal to 160 beats at rest. Well, you'll see what I mean when we talk about these rhythms coming up. Because you can have a fast heart rate, but still be considered a normal rhythm, depending on what your other symptoms are. So all matching upright P waves in lead 2 are considered sinus P waves until proven otherwise. All right, so again, we're going all the way back, chapters 1 and 2. You have your sinus node here, which is located in the right atrium, right here. That impulse that we're going to get from a positive and negative charge of my potassium and my sodium, where we're going to release calcium, is going to travel. When that impulse travels, this is known as your conduction system. It's going to travel the normal pathway of the heart, which is starting up here at top and going down from top to bottom. There, I want to reach my AV node, which is right here. Now notice, we have a chamber over here. We're going to take interatrial tracts to send that impulse there, and we're going to take internodal tracts to send my impulse to my AV node. That's going all the way back. So if you don't understand anything I just said, you need to go back to chapter 1 and review in chapter 2 as well. Once that impulse gets here to my AV node, it's then going to split down what's called the bundle of His, and it's going to go to my ventricles. Okay? And then remember, on your rhythm, your atrium is represented by the P wave, and your ventricles is represented by the QRS complex and your T wave. So here's your atrium represented by the P wave. Your QRS represents your ventricles. Your sinus rhythm is the normal rhythm. Impulses propagate in the sinus rhythm. In the sinus node. Propagate, that's where they begin. They begin to travel. They get that spark right there. They're initiated in the sinus node. They're then going to travel through the atria and down to the ventricles. This is known as that conduction system. Every P wave is married to a QRS, meaning it needs to be preceding the QRS, in front of the QRS, meaning every QRS there needs to be a P wave. Every P wave there needs to be a QRS. They're married. And the heart rate is the normal 60 to 100 beats per minute. So here's my rule. So I've been saying so far that you need to make note cards. I've been giving you a little information that you can be put on note cards. Now that we're in chapter 7, you're going to be learning at least 33 different types of rhythms. This is your first rhythm. Get your note card, put it on a note card, and start memorize it. Don't forget it. All the way through October, you're going to have to know this. So start memorizing them now, and don't memorize it, forget about it, come back and relearn it. Every day or once a week, keep on reviewing what these rules are. Because right now it's only 1, but by the time we get to the end of this, there's going to be 33, okay? So the rules for my sinus rhythm. And this, if you'll notice, will follow your questions from chapter 6 on how to interpret a rhythm. And the normal rate needs to be 60 to 100 beats per minute. Our rhythm needs to be regular. P waves need to be upright, matching, and married. My interval needs to be, for PR, between 0.12 and 0.20 seconds, and it needs to be constant. My QRS needs to be less than 0.12. And for me to have a sinus rhythm, the cause is going to be normal. I'm not going to have any adverse effects, and I do not need treatment because this is a sinus rhythm, which is normal. Okay, this is my sinus rhythm. So notice, the first thing I notice is my QRSs, they're negative, which means if I were to try to figure out that complex, this is actually considered a QS. Here's my Q, and here is my S. Q is my first downward deflection, and there is my S, which is my second downward deflection. Okay, so my sinus rhythm. My heart rate needs to be 60 to 100 beats per minute. So if I were to do the 6-second method, which is using 10, counting my QRSs, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, let's count it 90 or 80. If my heart rate is between 80 and 90 beats per minute, am I a normal heart rate? Yes, because my normal heart rate needs to be 60 to 100 beats per minute. The next thing I want to focus on is, how do I know where my QRSs are? I want to look for the spike. That tells me that that is my QRS complex. And I know that the wave before my QRS is P, and the wave after my QRS is T. And I want to point out your baseline. So in between each of these QRSs, you're going to have a baseline, and that tells me the difference between my beats. So this is 1 beat. There's my P, my QRS, my T. Baseline. Here's my second beat. Baseline. Third beat. Baseline. Okay? So I did want to point out on how do you determine what's the first thing you look at. The first thing you're going to look at is your QRSs. How do you know what's the QRS? That's going to be that spike. How do you know what wave is P and what one is T? The wave before QRS is P, the wave after is T. How do you know the baseline? It's going to be in between your T wave and your P wave. But notice my little bitty line right here in between my waves and my QRS segment complexes, that is known as my segments, not the baseline. It is only a baseline if it's in between the T and the P. If it's in front or after your QRS, it is known as the PR segment or the ST segment. Alright, that's the very first rhythm that you need to know. And we're going to compare all the other rhythms to that first rhythm. So the next rhythm we're going to learn is called your sinus bradycardia. And sometimes you'll hear me call it the sinus brady. This is a slower than normal rhythm from the sinus node. Impulses are going to originate in the sinus node, and it's going to travel the conduction system at a normally as it should. The only difference is I'm going to have a slower heart rate. Your QRS complex can be positive, but it also can be negative. So that one we just looked at previously, you noticed your QRS was negative, or isoelectric, depending on the lead that's being monitored. So if I was on my chest leads on V3-4, my QRS might be more isoelectric because it's changing from a negative to a positive deflection as it travels that conduction system through the electrodes that we have placed on the body. Here's the rules of my sinus bradycardia. My sinus bradycardia, guess what? Heart rate's going to be less than 60. But everything else is the same as far as my 5 questions. My regularity is going to be regular. P waves are going to be upright, matching, and married. PR is going to be in between 0.12 and 0.20. QRS is going to be less than 0.12. But notice for a sinus rhythm, we did not have a cause and effect or a treatment. So this is when it's going to get a little bit more trickier. My cause of a sinus bradycardia, which is a slow heart rate, could be vagal stimulation, MI, which stands for myocardial infarction, hypoxia, digitalis toxicity, or a well-trained athlete. This is a national test question. It's going to ask, a well-trained athlete is more than likely going to have what type of rhythm? And it's going to say sinus rhythm, sinus bradycardia, maybe a sinus tachycardia, or a sinus arrest. What are some adverse effects of having a sinus bradycardia? The adverse effects is it's too slow. A heart rate can cause decreased cardiac output. So I said I'm going to be saying that a lot. So if I have a slow heart rate, what effect does it have on the heart? Decreased cardiac output. How do we treat somebody who has a sinus bradycardia? We're not going to treat them unless they are symptomatic. And then we're going to consider atropine if they are symptomatic. This is what a sinus bradycardia looks like. So again, I'm going to point out the first thing I want to look at is where's my QRSs, which is these spikes right here. Do I have QRSs? Yes, I do. The next thing I want to point out is how do I know my P wave from my T wave? The wave in front of that QRS is P. The wave after it is a T. How do I know my baseline? My baseline is between the between the T and the P wave. This is not the baseline. These two little lines right here, those are my PR segments and my ST segments. Okay? The more I say it and you hear me say it, the more it's going to stick in your head. So how do I know it's a bradycardia? Well, I have QRSs. I have P waves. My P wave is married to every QRS. There's a P wave, there's a QRS. There's a P wave, there's a QRS. There's a P wave, there's a QRS. They're all married. And the next question that I need to ask myself is, what is my heart rate? And what is my regularity? So let's review regularity real quick. Regularity, we're going to measure the R to R interval. That's the part of the QRS, and we're going to measure in between them on all of them to see if it's regular or if it's irregular. And all I'm doing is counting the little boxes. I'm not doing any other calculation other than counting. I know that one of these big boxes equals 5 little boxes. So I'm going to count by tens. So 5, by fives, I'm sorry, 10, 15, 20, that's 24 boxes here, 25, 26, 27 boxes. I'm going to do it here. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27. So all I'm doing is counting the big boxes and then adding the extra boxes on both sides. 5, 10, 15, 20, 24, 28. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27, 28. 5, 10, 15, 20, 24, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm only one box away from 27 and 28. So my regularity is going to be regular because it is constant. It's the same number within 1 and 2 boxes away from each other. So if I were to ask myself the 5 questions that we learned in Chapter 6, do I have QRSs? Yes. Am I regular? Yes. Next question is my heart rate. If I am a regular rhythm, what method am I going to use for heart rate? My 6-second method, which is counting my QRSs by 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60. Now, this picture, and this is a perfect example, is telling me that this is a sinus bradycardia, but we just got 60 beats per minute when we did the 60-second method by counting the QRSs times 10. But a bradycardia needs to be less than 60. And here I am 60 even. So this is a mistake in your book. We all make mistakes. So don't rely so heavily on your book and think that it does not make mistakes, because it does. So my heart rate was 60. The next question of my 5 questions is, do we have P waves? Yes, we do. And then the last 2 questions is, what are my intervals for PR and QRS? Now remember your rules. Your PR interval, and this is all the way back to Chapter 2, is from the beginning of that P wave right here to the beginning of your QRS right here. And then your QRS interval is from the beginning of the QRS to the end of the QRS. How do you tell where does it begin and end? You're going to look at that segment in that baseline. On that baseline, where does it change? Right here into a P. So that's the line I'm going to count. On your QRS, where does it change from the segment to the QRS? Right there on that line. And where does it end? Right here on this line. And then I'm going to count the boxes in between and multiply them by 4 seconds, which tells me the time it takes from my conduction system, my impulse, to get from the atrium to the ventricles. All right, third rhythm. So again, You need to be making note cards because now we're already on your third rhythm. And like I said, at the end of this, you're going to have memorized 33 rhythms. So a sinus tachycardia, right here, is a rhythm within the sinus node that fires or sends off an impulse at a heart rate faster than normal. What was that normal heart rate again? 60 to 100 beats per minute. The impulse originates in the sinus node and travels the conduction system normally. Your QRS complex again can be positive, negative, or isoelectric, depending on the lead you are looking at. So this is what I would put on your note card. I would put these rules. Sinus tachycardia on one side, and then list your rules out on the other side. So the rate of a sinus tachycardia is going to be between 101 and 160 beats per minute. It is going to be regular, P waves upright, matching, and married. PR in between 0.12 and 0.20, QRS less than 0.12. Now notice that your causes, effects, and treatment are going to be different. So and this is something really good to start memorizing now, because when we get into EKG2, you're going to need to know what the different medications and responses are to the heart. Okay, so the cause of a sinus tachycardia, notice medicine can cause you to have a sinus tachycardia. Atropine, other medications, hypoxia, emotions. That was your question for last week's discussion, was if you were given distressing news, what's going to happen to your heart rate? It's going to increase, which could result in a sinus tachycardia, which could be caused by emotions. Pulmonary embolus, MI, which again stands for myocardial infarction, CHF, fever, vagus nerve inhibition, and thyrotoxicosis. Try saying that one. What kind of effects will this have on the heart? Again, you're going to hear me say this over and over and over. Decreased cardiac output. And make sure you fully understand what decreased cardiac output means. That means my blood is not circulating like it should. It can also cause myocardial ischemia. Ischemia is going to come back to you in EKG too. That is the first sign of a heart attack, and you're going to learn about it in EKG too. If the heart rate is too fast or too long. So when y'all answered your discussion question and said that it could result in a heart attack, you were correct. What are we going to do? We're going to treat the cause, and we can treat it with medications such as your beta blockers. And also you're going to treat the cause. So here's an example of a sinus tachycardia. So I'm going to go through those questions that you learned in chapter 6 that you need to put into memory. And the first question is, do you have QRSs? Yes, I have QRSs. Next question, do we have P waves? How do I know where my P wave is? The P is before the QRS and the T is after. And look how short that baseline is. There's hardly none, and it goes right into a P. So, do I have P waves? Yes. And are they married? Yes. 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 Are they constant? And do they look alike? Are they upright? And are they matching? Yes. So, we have QRSs, we have P waves. And I want to know, what's my regularity? How do I figure out that regularity? Again, we're going to go in between the R's and count the little boxes in between. Here I see 4 boxes, plus 5 is 9, 10, 11, 12. 9, 10, 11. 10, 11, 12. 9, 10, 11, 12. And again, all I'm doing is just counting those little boxes in between. I got 11 here. I got 12 here. 12 here. 12 here. I believe I got 11 here. And you get the idea. They're probably going to be between 11 and 12 boxes all the way down. And I was counting in between each one of these R to R intervals. Since I'm only one box away from 11 and 12, this is going to be a regular rhythm. So I have QRSs, I have P waves, they are married. My heart rate, my regularity is regular. The next question is my heart rate and my intervals. My heart rate, if I have a regular rhythm, I can use the 6-second method, which is counting by 10. The QRS is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120. So my heart rate is 120 beats per minute. What is the normal heart rate? 60 to 100 beats per minute. Is that normal? No, it is higher, which could mean I have a tachycardia. And then, of course, I'm going to do my PR intervals, which you're going to find where does that P wave begin, where's the beginning of my QRS, count the little boxes in between. QRS is the beginning of that QRS to the end of the QRS, and you're going to count the boxes in between and multiply times 0.04 seconds. The next rhythm we're going to talk about is your sinus arrhythmia. It is the only irregular rhythm from the sinus node. Notice, irregular. So what's my regularity? Irregular. It is the only irregular rhythm from the sinus node. If you remember, I pointed out, if you see arrhythmia, abnormal. Patterns are cyclic, usually correspond with the breathing pattern. Your QRS can be positive, negative, or isoelectric. Here are your rules. Your rate of a sinus arrhythmia, is going to be varying with your respiratory pattern, your breathing pattern. It's going to be irregular. If you remember, that's going to be chaos, right? It's not going to be just 1 or 2 box difference between your R intervals. It's going to be plenty of boxes that are different, and it's going to be crazy. P waves are going to be upright, matching, and married. PR is still going to be constant. QRS is still going to be less than 0.12. But what can cause me to have an irregular arrhythmia? Heart disease and breathing, and it is calming during sleep. So you can have a national test question that's going to ask you what type of rhythm is normally seen during sleep, or somebody who might have a heavy breathing pattern. That's going to be your sinus arrhythmia. Do we have any effects on the heart? Not this time. So notice we do not have the decreased cardiac output. And is there a treatment? Not this time. And again, I'd put that in a note card. Here's your sinus arrhythmia. So we know it's going to be irregular, so let's just go ahead and skip ahead and see what my regularity is. I'm going to count the big boxes by 5, 10, and then I'm going to count my little boxes. This is 14, 15, 16, 17. 5, 10, 15, 16, 17. 5, 10, 14, 15, 16, 17. I believe this is where the other mistake is in your book. That's 15, 16. Yeah. Watch this be regular. 15, 16, 17, 18. 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. 5, 10, 15. Wait. 5, 10, 15, 20, 3, 24. Which that could actually be considered as a pause because the rest of your rhythm is pretty regular. So again, we're not going to rely on your book. This is another bad example of a sinus arrhythmia. For it to be irregular, we should have had like 13 here, 20 here, I don't know, 50 here, 10 here, and then you'll notice that it's not a regular rhythm. So again, this is another book mistake. No worries. Nobody's perfect. If I wrote a book, I'd probably have mistakes all over. All right, next rhythm, sinus arrest. This is a pause, like the one we just saw, right? This is a pause that occurs when the regularly firing sinus node suddenly stops for a brief period. One or more QRST sequences will be missing. An escape beat from a lower pacemaker may then take over. So that's why we're talking about those inherent beats in the pacemakers. Your QRS complex can be positive, negative, or isoelectric, again, depending on what leads you're looking at. So what are my rules for a sinus arrest? First of all, it can occur at any rate. It's going to be regular, but interrupted by a pause. And your pause is not a multiple of an R to R interval, which we'll talk about that in a minute. You're normal before the pause for your P waves, but after your pause, it might differentiate. Your PR interval is going to be between 0.12 and 0.20 seconds, but it could be different after the pause. And your QRS is going to be less than 12, but again, it could be different after that pause. Cause of a sinus arrest could be ischemia. Again, that's the beginning signs of a heart attack, hypoxia, or digitalis toxicity. And what are some of the effects? There's our favorite, decreased cardiac output. So notice my sinus arrhythmia, there is no effects of the heart. There is no treatment. There is no decreased cardiac output. My sinus rhythm, there is no decreased cardiac output. But my sinus brady, my sinus tachy, and my sinus arrest all have decreased cardiac output. How do we treat it? Atropine, oxygen if symptoms, hold any bradycardia inducing medication, meaning if we are trying to cause somebody to have a slower heart rate, then we are inducing that bradycardia. But if we are in a sinus arrest, we do not want to induce the bradycardia medications. And this is where we're going to talk about those multiples. So we're going to ask ourselves the questions: do we have QRSs? What's my heart rate? Do I have P waves? Are they married? What's my PR interval? And what's my QRS interval? But now we can clearly see that we have a pause right here. So now, and then we would remember, if we have a pause, we have to get the range rate, the slowest to the fastest rate, and that's calculating in between your R to R intervals and dividing by 1500 or 300 depending on what method you want to use. But now, once you get through all that, we want to know the multiples. So if we know an R is supposed to be right here, whatever that distance is, 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. We know that in 18 little boxes should be my next R. So 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18. This is where my next R should have come. That's one multiple of R. And then I'm going to count from where that R was supposed to be, 18 more boxes, and it should wind up here. So we're missing two multiples of R's. And notice this here. Look how crazy this QRS complex is, right? Guess what this is? This is your escape beat, meaning all of a sudden we got an impulse and then we went back to a normal rhythm. And this is known as your... Now we have what's called your sinus block, and it is also called the sinus exit block. This is a pause that occurs when the sinus node fires its impulse on time, but the impulse exits from the sinus node to the atrial tissue is blocked. The beat that the sinus node propagated, which means it began, is not conducted anywhere. The pause will be a multiple of the previous R to R interval. and it's going to be exactly 2 or more R-to-R cycles that will fit into the pause. The QRS can be positive, negative, or isoelectric, depending on the lead you are looking at. So for a sinus block, it can occur at any rate, right? It's going to be regular but interrupted, but it's also going to have the multiple of R2R. P waves upright matching married. PR is going to be constant in between its rules. QRS is going to be less than 0.12. But look at my cause. I can have a sinus block that could be caused by medications, hypoxia, or vagal stimulation. The adverse effects, how many times have I said it now? Decreased cardiac output. And how can we treat this? With atropine, with oxygen for symptoms, and holding that bradycardia-induced medications. And here is your R2R multiples again, which I just showed you on that previous slide. And there is that escape beats. That's it for chapter 7. I'm going to do the first couple of practice problems with you so you can watch me do it. I've received emails from students saying that they don't fully understand how to count. So please pay as closely as attention as you can to how I am doing it. Watch it as many times as you need to. And if you still are struggling with when do you start counting those intervals, just give me an email. We can have a Zoom meeting or talk over the phone about it. So here's those questions I was talking about. The first question is, do we have QRS complexes? How do you find the QRS? You're going to look for the spikes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, so yes, I have QRS complexes. My next question is am I regular? You're going to go to those spikes and count the boxes in between. I like to count the big boxes by 5 because they have 5 little boxes in there. And then the extra boxes I just keep on counting. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27, 28 little boxes. Next one. I'm going to skip those 2 for now and add them at the end. 5, 10, 15, 20, 24, 25, 26. Again, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26, 27. I'm going to skip these 3 boxes and count them at the end. 5, 10, 15, 20, 24, 25, 26, 27. So my boxes are only 1 and 2 boxes apart, 28, 26, 27, 27, which means that I am regular. For a regular rhythm, how do I calculate that heart rate? I'm going to use the 6-second method and multiply my QRSs by 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So my heart rate is 50 beats per minute. Okay. Now my next question is, do I have P waves? Remember, if this is my spike, the wave before my spike is P. There's my P wave. Here's my P wave. Is there a P wave for every one of my QRSs? Yes, 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 and yes. Are my P waves all upright? Yes. P waves are matching, they're upright, they're married. Then my next question is going to be, what is my PR interval? So this is where students have a little struggle. So remember, this is the baseline here in between your P wave, your T wave, and your P wave. And then when do I see the change on that baseline? That's going to be the beginning of my P wave. And then I'm going to measure to the beginning of the change for my QRS, which is right there. If you're working in your book, use a ruler, make pretty little lines, keep them as straight as you can. And then you're going to count the boxes in between. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I counted 5 little boxes times 0.04 seconds, which is going to give me 20. And that's going to be 0.20 seconds. Okay? Now, keep in mind, if I am using this rhythm, this beat right here, to calculate my heart rate, my intervals, I cannot use these other sections. I have to stay on the same rhythm that I am using. So my QRS interval is from the beginning, which I already have that line of that QRS, to the end. When does it end? When we see it going either into that wave or going back to the baseline. So I'm going to say it ends right about here. And then I'm going to count those boxes in between. And I'm going to double check because I think I'm off a little. So let's say right here and about right there. 1, 2, 3. I got 3 boxes. 3 times 0.04 is 12. And I got 0.12 seconds. That's supposed to be a 2 and an S. So now we're going to look at our answers and interpret this rhythm. And we're going to remember we're comparing them to a normal sinus rhythm. So do I have QRSs in a normal sinus rhythm? Yes. Do I have regularity in a normal sinus rhythm? Yes. Do I have a slow heart rate? No. My heart rate needs to be 60 to 100 beats, and I have 50 beats here. P waves. Do I have P waves in a normal rhythm? Yes. My QRS interval in a normal rhythm needs to be between 0.12 and 0.20 seconds. Am I in between? Yes. QRS interval needs to be less than 0.12. Yes. So if everything is normal except for my heart rate, what kind of rhythm does this tell me I have? This tells me, if I were to memorize my rules on my note cards, that I have a sinus bradycardia. Okay, I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'm going to leave the rest for you to practice. The more you practice this, the better you become, the more sunken it is in your head, and you don't have to do so much studying. If you just watch me do this and don't practice on your own, you will never understand how to do this, and it will become more stressful than it needs to be. You just have to talk to yourself, ask yourself these questions, and practice, practice, practice. And the more you practice, the easier it's going to become. So, do we have QRSs? Yes, because these are the spikes, right? So, yes, I have QRSs. What's my regularity? You're going to count the boxes in between. I'm counting by 5s. 5, 10, 11, 12. 5, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's going to be 11, 9, 5, 9, 10, 11. And all I'm doing again is counting these boxes. 5, 9, 10, 11. That's going to be 11, 5, 9, 10, and 11. 10, 11, 11, 9, 10, 11, 10. I got 12 here. So, in between my order intervals, I have between 11 and 12 little boxes. which means I am regular. The next question I'm going to ask myself is, what is my heart rate? If I am a regular rhythm, I can use the 6 second. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 10, and 20. My heart rate is 120 beats per minute. Next question, do I have P waves? Yes, I do. How do I know where my P waves are? They're going to be in front of that QRS. Here's a P, there's my T, QRS. So here's P, T, P, T. Ooh, look at that P. It's really small. T, and then look what happened to my P here. It's starting to get buried in my T. T, P, T, P, and so on. So do I have P? Yes, I do. Next question. What is my PR interval? So remember, you got to choose one complex to measure off of. You can't jump around when you're measuring. And you can use any of these complexes on here. So I would look for the easiest one to tell where my P and where my T is. And on here, that's this first one. Because you notice the P changes right here, right there on this solid line. So that's the beginning of my P. And then you can see my QRS changes right here on the line before the solid line. Right? So that's what I'm going to use to calculate. So P is from this solid line to the line before the next solid line, which means I have 4 boxes. 4 times 4 is 16 seconds. QRS. It's that line before the solid line and the line after the solid line, which is 2 boxes, and 2 times 4 is 8 seconds. So let's look at my answers. For a normal rhythm, do I have QRSs? Yes. Am I regular? Yes. On a normal rhythm, am I 120 beats? No, that's fast. Do I have P waves? Yes. Is my interval between 0.12 and 0.20 seconds? Yes. Is my QRS interval less than 0.12? Yes. All of my rules are normal except I have a high heart rate, which tells me that I have a sinus tachycardia. So that is all you're doing, is taking what you just learned, those 6 rhythms, and trying to answer them and memorizing those rules. And ask yourself these questions, but don't stop there. Once you figure out it's a sinus tachycardia, what can cause this? First of all, your emotions. That's that discussion problem. Also, medications can cause it. And what effect is this tachycardia going to have on the heart? It's going to have decreased cardiac output. And how do we treat a tachycardia? We're going to treat the symptoms, or we can give them medication to slow down their heart rate. So practice, practice, practice. There is nothing more new to learn about how to interpret a rhythm. The only thing new from here on out that you're going to learn is the different rules. And like I said, there's going to be 33 rhythms with their rules. And it can be a lot if you're trying to cram study. So if you start studying this week, your first 6 now, next week I believe you learn 8. And then just stay on top of it and don't let it pass you by. Again, always email me if you have any questions. If this lecture was not enough, I can do a Zoom meeting with you. We can talk over the phone. We can figure it out. Don't become overwhelmed. Reach out, and don't be too scared to reach out. Email me 100 times, as many as you need. I'm here to help you learn this information. I want you to be able to leave this class knowing that you actually learned something from it. All right. Oh, don't forget, your midterm is due this Friday. You should be able to review all your quizzes through your results tab in the My Lab. Good luck, everybody.